Saturday. It's June 8th, 2024, and you are listening to Morning Meeting. I'm Ashley Baker in London.
And I'm Michael Haney in New York City.
It's been yet another wild and unpredictable week in the news. President Biden is in France, where he commemorated the anniversary of D-Day while also meeting with Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky. Today marks a state visit with Emmanuel Macron, which means we get to watch our favorite First Lady, perhaps of all time, Brigitte Macron. What will she be wearing? Maybe Vuitton. We'll report on that later. Anyway, additionally, in French news, Novak Djokovic has pulled out of the French Open due to a knee injury, which gives us tennis lovers very few reasons to keep on going. But in the US, in the world of entertainment, Alec Baldwin and his family have announced that they are set to star in their own reality TV show called The Baldwins. It will be broadcast on TLC next year. I mean, Michael, honestly, it was really a matter of time, no? I mean, how many kids does he have? That is a lot of school tuitions. But as usual, airmail is the antidote to all of that. We have a great issue and a great show.
You're exactly right, Ashley. We have a great show today packed with fascinating conversations. First, it's election season, not just in the UK and the US, but also in the European Union, where the European Parliament is holding elections next week. For years, the Parliament was seen as the domain of faceless bureaucrats. No more, however, as our own George Pendle reveals, it's now become a finishing school for right-wingers and fascists. Then, Linda Wells will join us to have a serious talk about Paris Hilton. Linda will tell us why we've all been wrong in our national pastime of the past 20 years, underestimating Hilton and her business savvy. And Linda's also going to tell us about the brand new issue of Airmail Look. And finally, our colleague Elena Clavarina will join us to discuss her shocking reporting revealing a culture of alleged sexual harassment and alleged financial impropriety that exists inside the art world's most prestigious design gallery. So, Ashley, where would you like to begin today?
Michael, let's start with the consequential elections that too few people are talking about. Our colleague George Pendle is here to explain what's happening in the European Parliament. George is an editor-at-large at Airmail and the author of several books, including Death, a Life, and Happy Failure. Welcome, George.
Hello.
So, George, the European Parliament is one of those bodies that is covered in the papers and in the press, but perhaps doesn't receive the attention it deserves. So what is it exactly?
Well, the European Parliament is the main legislative body for the EU, and it kind of comes up with the laws and regulations for everything that goes on within the European Union. But you're right that it's not really covered in great depth. When one thinks of Congress, one can imagine the great kind of neoclassical building. When one thinks of House of Parliament in England, one imagines the great Gothic building. But I have this image in my head of the European Parliament in my mind, and I know it's not accurate, but it's of a lightly tilled brown field stretching off into a kind of grey, murky distance with a light drizzle kind of falling. That's what I think of when I think of the European Parliament. It's just this kind of I can't really put my finger on what it is or what it does, even though it's in Brussels, which is not a field, but actually a modern city. It just seems to kind of slip past people's consciousness.
So, George, how many representatives are we talking about and who's in charge here?
So we're talking around about 700. The number kind of came down after the UK left due to Brexit in 2020. I think the last MEP, member of the European Parliament, left. But it's kind of a collection of these acronymic political groups, the EPP, the ID, really a kind of a conglomeration of parties from across Europe that share vaguely the same sort of sentiments. So you'll have a kind of moderate right group and a moderate left group. And then, of course, a far right and a far left, a kind of conglomeration of parties from Sweden, Denmark, Italy, and so on.
And George, in your piece, you suggest that this can be somewhat of a haven for politicians who have failed in their home countries. Can you give some examples of that?
The thing about the European Parliament is it allows politicians who can't get a foot up in their own country to kind of flourish on an international stage. Now, the greatest example I think of this is Nigel Farage, the architect of Brexit, who has never been elected a member of parliament in England, was a member of the European Parliament for almost, I think over 20 years. And now the reason for this is because the European Parliament elections are chosen by proportional representation. So basically every vote counts towards whether you are represented in the European Parliament. And this means that many strange small parties that would never only have 1% of the vote in their national elections can suddenly find themselves sitting there in Brussels with all the big dogs of European politics. Another example is this satirical German party called Die Party, and their main manifesto is rebuilding the Berlin Wall. They're like a number of kind of joke parties throughout the world, like the Monster Raving Loony Party in England. But they would never get voted into the German kind of government, but because they get about 1% of the vote, they got voted into the European Parliament.
So, George, I mean, all of this sounds comical, as you reveal in your column this week. It is easy to kind of laugh at the European Union, although they do set a lot of standards and laws for the EU, but these sort of goofball parties, that's one part of it. But as you note, like, it has bigger consequences for parties on the far right who are sort of building a coalition there almost, right?
That's right. I mean, over the last 3 decades or so, France's far-right National Rally Party, which was formerly the National Front and is now run by Marine Le Pen, has slowly been kind of increasing the number of European parliamentary seats. And now this serves kind of 2 purposes, 3 purposes really. It allows them to kind of try out being in government. It's almost like a playpen for wannabe politicians. They can try things out and nobody really takes them to task for anything that happens in the European Parliament. Because it's a European Parliament, the national presses of the various countries within Europe aren't all that interested. They're more interested in the national executives. What's happened is the National Rally under Marine Le Pen has been building and building seats, and is now kind of a very influential body within the European Parliament. And it has, Marine Le Pen just the other day has been kind of reaching across the aisle to Giorgia Meloni, the far-right Italian president, inviting her to form this kind of hard-right supergroup within the European Parliament. They have slowly been accreting so many seats that if they did join together, they would form pretty much the second largest party in the Parliament. And from being these kind of, many people have described the European Parliament as actually a kind of pressure valve in which far-right people can go and they don't cause much trouble. But actually, they would suddenly start to be able to start causing trouble if they were to unite together.
And George, what kind of trouble are we talking about? I mean, what does the European Parliament have oversight of that could be consequential?
Well, we're talking everything from national security, from aid to Ukraine, to immigration. And Giorgia Meloni and Marine Le Pen have both in the past been very close to very favorable Vladimir Putin. Now, recently, Meloni has kind of calmed her rhetoric a bit, but that's partly, if you're being cynical, because she's about to receive a very large sum of money from the EU in post-pandemic funds. But the worry is that if they were to get into the European Parliament with a significant number of them together, banded together for kind of the first time, that they would be able to kind of halt aid to Ukraine, or even lessen it, or even give it up entirely. And suddenly with immigration, this is a debate which many countries in Europe are having to deal with. But they are increasingly, even though they're not in power, they're influencing the mainstream parties' views towards immigration. The EU is very well known for having no borders within itself, but it's increasingly setting up this kind of curtain around itself to prevent immigration from Africa and from the Middle East.
In a sense, whether they become kings, they can certainly become kingmakers if they use their bloc to then partner with someone else and sort of still get a lot of what they want. As you sort of say, it's become this potential finishing school for the far right / fascist in Europe.
That's right. And really, it's kind of what we're seeing everywhere. Like here in the United States, England, the usual moderate right is reaching towards the far right for ideas. In England, Rishi Sunak is trying to fight the upcoming election by seizing on all this anti-immigration rhetoric. And Trump, of course, is happy to ship people off who come here from abroad. And what we're seeing here is the European Parliament, which has been very moderate throughout its history, very liberal. But it's suddenly starting to have this influence from the far right pressed upon it. Or at least they're starting to, in fact, engage with the far right. The head of the EU, who's Ursula von der Leyen, the EU commissioner, has been trying to convince Meloni to join her party, the EPP. She's kind of battling Le Pen for Meloni's backing. And so you're in this strange situation whereby suddenly the real, as you say, the kingmakers are the far right in the European Parliament.
And George, I mean, these are people whose views have rendered them not especially popular all the time in their home countries, but how is voter turnout or lack thereof contributing to this phenomenon?
Well, this is the large part, Ashley. That's a very good point. I mean, this is generally seen by policy wonks as a second-tier election. And the European Parliament elections are generally seen as a place where people in the countries of Europe can place a vote against the party in power in their country. So it's kind of like this protest vote, which they can get. And unfortunately, the protest vote, which has always been seen as just that for the last 20 years or so, oh, don't worry about it, it's just a protest vote against my government, is actually starting to have real results. And so what we're getting is protest votes becoming actual votes. And now more and more, the protest is not a protest vote at all. People want the far right. This is especially amongst the young. A lot of people are showing that there's been a spike in voting for the far right amongst the kind of TikTok generation. And so what was once this pressure valve, what was once just a protest vote, is now a serious vote.
And George, the elections will take place
from June the 6th to June the 9th. It takes a few days to tot up all the votes.
Any sense of how things will shake out?
Well, everybody is fully expecting the hard right parties to increase the number of seats they have. At the last election in 2019, Le Pen's National Rally, I think, had an equal number of votes to Macron's party in the European Parliament election. This year, they're expected to get many more.
All right, George, well, it sounds like another European story that we have to cover. Thank you so much for explaining it to us.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, George.
Well, Michael, who knew that Brussels was such a hotbed of political activity? I guess probably the Europeans.
Well, some Europeans, I think most are not paying attention to. But now let's see where these elections take us.
All eyes on Brussels, Michael.
All eyes on Brussels. The muscles from Brussels.
Michael, you know what I was was thinking about in the shower this morning?
How great your hair looks.
No, Michael, I've been wondering why we haven't read more stories of Me Too in the art world. It seems like a universe that would be rife with them, at the risk of sounding incredibly judgmental. It turns out our own senior editor, Elena Clavarino, has uncovered a fascinating and distressing story of some alleged improprieties behind the doors of Carpenter's Workshop, which is the art world's most prestigious design gallery. Elena is one of our wonderful colleagues, a senior editor here at Airmail, and she's here to take us behind those closed doors. Welcome, Elena.
Hi, good morning.
So, Elena, we know the art world is full of characters, and you have gone deep into two of them in this week's issue of Airmail. For the uninitiated, what exactly is Carpenter's Workshop?
So it's a design gallery. I guess they would like to say design art gallery. So they sell functional sculpture, which I guess is a way of differentiating regular furniture from functional art, which is a concept onto itself, which they kind of pioneered. Because obviously, like a painting, for example, like has a different, like an intrinsic value because it's one of a kind and it can't be replicated. And therefore, like historically, design has had lower margins than fine art. So they kind of pioneered this idea of an item of furniture being no different to a sculpture, and therefore it having the same kind of value as a fine art object, if that makes sense. And it was very brilliant.
And how long has it been around?
Started in 2006.
And who are the two gentlemen behind it?
They're both French. One is called Loïc Legaillard, and the other one is called Julien Lambray. And they're family friends who grew up in France. And then Loïc is now based in London and Julien is based in Paris.
And what was so unique about this sort of from a business perspective? Like, who are some of the artists that they initially signed on?
That they initially signed on, they signed on this family friend of theirs called Vincent Dubourg. And then pretty soon they kind of got all these young people who were graduating from Eindhoven, the design school in the Netherlands, like Joop Smeets and Martin Baz, who all kind of became very big in the design world, in part, obviously, thanks to Carpenters too. And today they really represent like some of the biggest names in design, like Charlotte Perriand, Jean Prouvé, Zaha Hadid, Karl Lagerfeld, like the list goes on. And
yeah, and Elena, some of these are estates, right? Obviously, Prouvé and Lagerfeld and Zaha Hadid have all passed away or have all died. So the design world is sort of different in one important way from the quote-unquote traditional art world, which is the way that works are reproduced. So can you tell us a little bit about how Carpenters handles, let's say, a limited edition chair?
So some artists handle their own production, but Carpenters was unique in that in 2015, it opened its facility outside of Paris so that they could handle their artist production, and they brought artisans in-house. And there have been some complaints on behalf of artists about them not being transparent about stocks of items they've produced. Maybe they say that there is X number of chairs here, and in reality, there is Y number of chairs. These were the complaints. And some of the things produced by them were not kind of up to par with artist standards. And sometimes there's lack of transparency, but like with invoices, that basically like there were two separate invoices, one for buyers, one for artists. And sometimes those numbers didn't match up.
You spoke to quite a few artists, right, who have been represented by the gallery. So can you give us sort of an example of how those invoices wouldn't match up?
So I spoke to one artist, for example, who complained that, for example, he had been given an invoice that said one of his works was sold for, this is not the number he gave me, but let's say $10,000. And he'd then spoken to the collector who had purchased it. And it was actually sold for a lot more than this 10,000, let's say. That's an example. And there are many more examples that I came across as I spoke to artists of that nature.
And yet, Elena, it seems like this hasn't really impeded their growth. As you report, they opened a social club and gallery here in London last fall. It's called Ladbroke Hall. What is that like?
It's very glitzy. Renovations cost around like $40 million, full of beautiful sculptures and artwork by famous designers and artists. But they got quite a big investment from a private equity called Montefiore a few years back. But also, they do kind of have this monopoly in the sense of the design world. They've created such a big network of collectors around the world. So I think a lot of artists are scared to speak out against them or leave them, let's say, because it's obviously an important platform for them.
Yeah, but Elena, as you started digging into the story of Carpenter's Gallery, you uncovered a lot of personnel issues that weren't related to those alleged financial inconsistencies. Can you talk to us a little bit about the Me Too problems that Carpenter's has experienced?
Yeah, so as I dug into it, kind of appeared like a Me Too nightmare. There's a lot of stories about sexual harassment, 3 different people I spoke to. Basically, Louis allegedly kept condoms in his office cupboard, and a lot of employees refer to that as a sex cupboard. One female employee was told her makeup looked like wall paint. She used to wear a lot of makeup because she had acne and was asked to go home. It was just also a very common grievance amongst people I spoke to that there were allegedly very obvious affairs being conducted with employees often. And yeah, I mean, also just a lot of bullying. When I asked one former employee for examples of bullying, their response was, it's like trying to remember a specific blade of grass. It was just quite a toxic workplace culture from what I'm hearing.
One of the more chilling details in your story, Elena, concerns what happened when you tried to speak with a former employee of one of Carpenter's London office, in which one of the employees said it seemed like they were suggesting that perhaps the gallery had hired you to try to get information out of this former employee.
It was actually an artist. Basically, he was very aloof when I tried to talk to him and very kind of standoffish. And then I realized he kind of admitted, he said, sorry, I thought that maybe you'd been hired by the gallery. Can you please send me your credentials? Can you please send me the website of the magazine you're working for? And then only then did he loosen up and say, okay, I feel calm enough now to have a conversation with you.
You've done a terrific job of reporting and getting insights in this. I was just sort of stunned. I mean, you've got at least 8 employees that the sources have said one of the partners may have slept with, allegedly. Do you think there'll be any fallout from this in the design world, art and design world? Will they lose any clients, do you think, or what's your sense of it?
Obviously, there's just been like a lot of Me Too stories all around ever since the Weinstein story broke out, just in general. But I feel like artists have kind of come under the spotlight in recent years. Galleries and art institutions have not. And I think it's an interesting field. And also it is oftentimes the way galleries behave with their artists can be borderline, because obviously they're big institutions working with individuals who are creative and they're artists and maybe not necessarily always business minded or business savvy and art trusting, I don't want to make gross generalizations here, but I think there is leeway to get away with borderline behavior. So I'm not sure how much of what I'm saying about carpenters may apply in the broader art world, but it is important that if you are one of the biggest galleries and an important institution like they are, that you set an example for everybody else. When you read the piece, you'll see there's been a lot of things going on, but it is important to draw light on some of these practices that I feel like are not just limited to carpenters.
Well, Elena, thank you so much for this wonderful story. It's really the kind of thing that needs to be read in full to understand the full gist of what's going on here. So it's in Airmail this week. It's called Behind Closed Doors. Thank you so much, Elena Clavarino.
Thank you guys so much.
We have a new issue of Airmail Look that came out yesterday. The marvelous editor of Airmail Look is here to talk about everything from Mount Jaro to Paris Hilton. Welcome, Linda. Okay, Linda, it's a new week. Same old us, but a new issue of Airmail Look. What do we have to look forward to?
Well, there is so much goodness in this issue, Ashley and Michael. You are going to have the best time. Ashley, you know what's in there. But Michael, this one's for you. I wrote a story about Paris Hilton, who I interviewed in her house in Beverly Hills. And that in itself was an experience. And I think my point of view about her was she's been so underestimated and sort of considered a joke for so long. And I found out that she has one of the top fragrance businesses globally. It makes the most money out of any fragrance company. And I don't know whether that's absolutely true, but it's among the top. And so she also has this incredible product empire, cookware, velour tracksuits, makeup, skincare products, all of it pink and sparkly. And she's bringing in what some estimate to be a total revenue of $4 billion from the sales of the fragrances alone. And they cost $25 a bottle. So that's a lot. So that was a really interesting experience.
Linda, how did you find her in person?
She was very different from the person that you know from The Simple Life and the rest, which she tells us now that she was playing a role in that. And she sort of, that role stuck with her in a way, and it allowed her to kind of protect herself. And she was no hair extensions, no eyelash extensions. She was not wearing any visible makeup. Her voice was low. She walked in, I sat with her in a sitting room, and she walked in and held her baby sort of facing out. And it's her son, who, I don't know how old he is, Phoenix, but maybe he's 2. And it was almost as if the baby was a shield of protection and also kind of a plea to treat her gently, which I was not intending to attack her, so that was easy. But she just seemed very, very much on the ball, very self-aware, really great sense of humor about herself, and would vacillate in her voice from the low voice, which meant business, to the high girly kind of ditzy voice, which was sort of self-mock.
Linda, what I liked about what was so revealing in your time with her is this is a classic story of our perceived snobbery about someone, which is formed 20 years ago. And yet here they are, been quietly, diligently working to build this empire, as you report, that sort of is perhaps the biggest selling perfume on the globe. So it's one of those eye-openers for me.
Yeah, it really was for me too. And I thought, I felt like I should apologize to her for just thinking that she was a joke for all those years. But I think if you lived in New York in the early aughts, she was everywhere. And I remember one time I was at a Marc Jacobs show and she decided that she wanted my seat. So she was sitting in it and she had to get kicked out of the seat. And now, believe me, I would get kicked out of that seat. But it was just a whole moment where I think she played it up to the hilt. And I also think she was living it. She was young. She was going to clubs. She was partying a lot. She had a lot of all those friends who were always in the paper and on Page Six. So she was definitely participating in this image of herself. But meanwhile, as you say, Michael, she was building this enormous business. And it is phenomenal what she's done. And this is not inherited money. I mean, granted, I'm sure there's something there that's inherited to start it out, but she really is working all the time. And the people from the fragrance company who had the license, they said she'll go to these signings and she'll stay until the last person takes the last selfie. And the team from the company is exhausted. They're just like, can we please go home? So she's really kind of outlasting everyone. One thing about Paris Hilton, she's never done Botox. And she has this home spa that is, I think it fills a 3-car garage, and it is filled with every piece of equipment that you would find in lots of different dermatologist offices and spas. There's hyperbaric chamber that could fit 6 people. There's infrared sauna. There's a cryotherapy machine. There are lasers. There's all sorts of things. She invites her friends over. She invites a facialist. She'll invite a nurse. She'll invite a doctor in and do all these treatments. And no wonder she hasn't had Botox. She's getting treatments all the time. So that was kind of impressive.
Linda, speaking of body and enhancements and whatever, and there's a pretty great story written by a really great writer I admire, Ashley Baker. It's in this week's issue about something I'd never even heard about called Mounjaro. What is this?
Well, Ashley Baker took one for the team. I don't know if you know her, but she is a wonderful reporter and she tried out Mounjaro and very bravely and candidly told us what the experience is about. So Ashley, go to it.
Well, I had FOMO. I'm seeing people take these weight loss shots. Wegovy is not big. And we've been covering this for 2 years at Airmail, maybe longer than that. I had FOMO over it. Like, I'm like many women I know, many women my age who have been trying to lose 10 pounds for a really long time. And ultimately, I've gone to crazy extreme measures. Many of them I've written about. Like I went to Buchinger, which was a very difficult experience, and drank broth for several days. And I fasted and I've done Prolon and I've done all these crazy things. So I'm like many, many, many women. And there is this miraculous new drug out there, class of drugs called GLP-1s that have been used for a long time to treat certain types of diabetes, but they're now FDA approved for weight loss. People are taking them. We've talked about Ozempic a lot. Mounjaro is kind of the next generation of these drugs. I took it for 3 weeks. I ordered a month's supply. I consulted with the doctor and I got it. And I'm like nervous talking about this because I feel like there's so much judgment and shame around this very topic. And I'm sure I'm going to get some feedback on this story and it makes me a little anxious. But I really believe that we as women have been beating ourselves up about our size, our bodies, our weight, our attempts to lose weight for so long. And I just said, if there's really a way for me to stop thinking about this question every single morning that has haunted me for my entire life. And frankly, I'm not proud of that. I wish I were a bigger person. I wish I were more accepting of myself. But I'm also in my 40s at this point, and I don't know if there's really any hope for me. Doesn't that sound depressing, Linda? Maybe it does.
I'm not going to let you go there. But I want to say that one of the things that I found very interesting about the story, Ashley, was the fact that you said maybe it's the antidepressant you never knew you needed. And it had, as much as we know we're not supposed to care about our weight and we're not supposed to worry about the 10 pounds and there are bigger problems in the world and we beat ourselves up for caring about it, as I can hear you doing. There is that element of it's a cloud that hangs over you every day when you wake up in the morning, you weigh yourself and you think, damn, and you beat yourself up. And Mounjaro shot relieved that for you. And that's something.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it was the first time in my adult life, truly, that I've ever not really thought about what I was eating. And it's not because I was eating certain foods or not eating certain foods. It just took this pressure away. It's like if you're walking a tightrope and you know there's a net beneath you, it's sort of like that. You know what it did for me, Linda? It just made me be able to get through an entire day without thinking that I should be doing something else to lose weight. Like, oh, I should be running more. Or I shouldn't have eaten that for lunch. Or these are tiny little things, but over time and over the years, they build up into something really annoying. And I think many women feel this way. I really don't think I'm like a unique situation in that. For some people, it's 2 pounds. For some people, it's 40 pounds. For some people, it's 200 pounds. For whatever reason, like it's a very difficult thing to shake. And I think what's so powerful about these new drugs is that it, for the first time, at least in my lifetime, it really gives you the opportunity to do that with very few, I mean, I'm knocking on wood as I say this, but very few side effects and very few downsides. I mean, like this has been proven to be a fairly miraculous development in the realm of health. And I thought it was just incredible, frankly, an incredible drug, a really interesting thing to try out. I'm not going to stay on it forever. I did it for 3 weeks. I've got some more in my refrigerator. Frankly, like just knowing that I have it is a huge relief to me because I've just decided I'm not going to beat myself up about this because I now know that there's a solution out there. It works and it frees up my mind to think about so many other things like doing the podcast with Michael, spending time with my family, all of those important things in life that really are what life is about. I just thought it was an incredible tool. So that's why I had to write about it.
I think it's interesting. I do think that we as women spend more time than anyone knows with this internal dialogue of, I need to lose weight. I'm not losing weight. What's wrong with me? I hate myself. I need to lose weight. And it is just like you get dressed and you hate yourself and you get undressed and you hate yourself. And I know it sounds like an exaggeration, but it just takes up a lot of energy and a lot of space in your brain. And to think that that could be eliminated for a while is an interesting phenomenon. Like it just goes away. So I think it's something that is another aspect of this very world-changing drug that is worth examining and looking for in the future.
Ladies, on the subject of health and wellness as well, can I ask one other question about something I was eager to learn in this week's issue?
I wish you would.
I will. Speaking of peace of mind, magnesium, which is getting a lot of conversation in our house. So tell us about the benefits of magnesium in this story we have this week.
People don't get enough magnesium, and it turns out that it makes you feel calm. It helps you sleep at night. It has a lot of behavioral benefits. And I don't know whether you heard about the Sleepy Girl cocktail. I'm sure you did, Michael.
I did. Brooke brought it to my attention. She's been like, I need to do the Sleepy Girl cocktail.
Right. It's magnesium. And I can't remember what else it is, but it looks like a Shirley Temple with magnesium in it. So this idea of taking magnesium at night, which I've started doing, and I can't really say that it's been working so well because my sleep has never been worse. But this idea of their magnesium sprays that you can spray in your skin and rub it in and it can go transdermally. So it's something that really our diets have been low in. You can get it from various cereals, grains, kale, dark leafy greens, but lots of doctors think that the supplement is the way to go just because it's hard to get it all from the diet.
So it is the season of the summer party. And one of our writers had a very unconventional tip for us on how to make yours the best party ever. Do tell.
No plus ones. The writer believes that the terrible thing about parties is that you bring your plus one and she doesn't want that plus one. Maybe she doesn't really like your boyfriend, or maybe she's never spent time with them. And she just thinks that everyone's going to have a better time if they come alone and not drag someone else along and let loose. And so that's the theory of this party. No plus ones ever, never for her wedding, for the end of time. She thinks that's going to be the cure. And as a plus one, sometimes, I don't know, my feelings might be hurt.
Yeah, but it's a hot take and we love a hot take and airmail look.
Right, that's true.
Well, Linda, it's another fabulous issue. Linda, remind us one more time where we can read it.
We are Airmail Look. You go airmail.news/look.
Hooray. Thank you so much, Linda.
Thank you both. Great to see you.
Me too.
Thank you, Linda.
Bye.
Bye.
There's only one place to discover a global snapshot of the current cultural scene. Airmail's Arts Intel Report. Our international research tool for what to do and where and when to do it is user-friendly, continuously updated, and meticulously curated. Arts Intel is handy at home, on the road, and when you're planning your next trip. It also includes indispensable lists of restaurants and hotels in key cities around the world, recommended by our well-traveled experts. Explore Arts Intel at airmail.news/arts-intel, and be sure to sign up for our Week in Culture newsletter, which is published every Wednesday afternoon at airmail.news/WIC. I'm Chris Garrett, an Airmail Deputy Editor, and I never leave home without it. Bon voyage.
Michael, it is the weekend. Free time beckons. I know you've got something you can recommend to us.
In this week's issue, we have an interview with Griffin Dunne about his terrific new memoir, The Friday Afternoon Club. Now, you can and should read it, but the book also reminded me to say, if you've never watched Dunne's film After Hours, this is your time. It came out in 1985, and it was directed by Martin Scorsese, and I love this film. I still remember watching it with my brother and him pointing to it as a reason I needed to move to New York. It's a wild, fun tale of a word processor played by Dunne who meets a girl and his night spins out from there. It's just fantastic. I love it. And as Dunne says in his memoir, he still meets people to this day who say they moved to New York City because of this film. And one of the things I love about it is it's also a time capsule of an early 80s New York City that was still very much a city that was stuck in the 70s. You see Soho and Tribeca as these dark, abandoned stretches of the city where anything and everything could happen. You got burned out cars, squatters and lofts. It's got Rosanna Arquette, it's got Catherine O'Hara, it's got Terry Garr, Lyndon Fiorentino, and as I said, Griffin Dunne. Scorsese even won Best Director at Cannes for this movie. It's called After Hours, and you can find it on Apple TV as well as other streamers. And you, my dear?
Well, Michael, as we've discussed, I'm reading the new book from Colm Tóibín. It's called Long Island. It's the follow-up to his 2009 novel, Brooklyn. It's the latest on his Enniscorthy novels. All of those novels take place in a small town in County Wexford, which is where the author grew up. But this one takes place in Long Island, and it follows these two characters, Ilis and Tony. Tony's a plumber. They live on the same little piece of land where Tony's parents and brothers and their families all grew up. And it takes place in the 1970s, and they have teenage children. And the story sort of begins with a shocking announcement. A stranger says that his wife is pregnant with Tony's baby, and that's where it all begins. And then the rest of the novel takes place in Enniscorthy and involves some familiar characters. But it's a really wonderful tale, right? Like, what Tóibín does so well is this notion of plot and character and weaving them together in a way that feels really immersive. So I've been enjoying it tremendously. I'm not quite done with it, so if it's a total disaster, I apologize. But it's called Long Island by Colm Tóibín, and it looks like it's going to be one of the hot reads of the summer. Why not get a head start? Well, Michael, thanks for being you. Thanks to all of our listeners for joining us. Will you please read us out?
The Morning Meeting is produced by Airplay Productions and edited by Jesse Cannon. Our co-editors are Graydon Carter and Alexander Stanley. Our chief operating officer is Bill Keenan, and our deputy editors are Ashley Baker, Chris Garrett, Nathan King, Julie Vitale, and Ash Carter. Our CMO is Emily Davis, and our music supervisor is Randall Poster. Our theme music is The Cute Monster by the Buddy Collette Quintet. A new edition of Airmail is published every Saturday, so please subscribe and enjoy all of our stories on airmail.news, which we update every day. You can also find us on Twitter and Instagram at Airmail Weekly, but we will be back here next Saturday with another edition of Morning Meeting. In the meantime, be sure to subscribe at Spotify or Apple Music, but most of all, thank you again for joining us.